Welcome to the Parsha Themes Shir. It's Parsha Toldos this week, and it is for the Refuah Shalema of Meah Shearim ben Leah Esther Chaya HaLevi. So, the beginning of the Parsha, we talk about the countenance of Avraham and Yitzchak. Ve'ela Toldos Yitzchak ben Avraham. Avraham holid es Yitzchak. And these are the generations of Yitzchak, the son of Avraham. Avraham fathered Yitzchak. Why the repetition? The cynics of that generation were saying that Sarah had become pregnant from Abimelech, since she had failed to conceive in all the years she was with Avraham. Therefore, God especially formed the countenance of Yitzchak to resemble that of Avraham, so that all could attest that Avraham had fathered Yitzchak. This is the meaning of the repetitive wording of the verse. Yitzchak is certainly the son of Avraham, since there is proof that Avraham fathered Yitzchak. That's according to Rashi. But the rationale underlying this claim of the cynics of that generation has an obvious and fatal flaw. It was clear that the infertility problem was because of Sarah, not Avraham. Sarah had her maidservant Hagar marry Avraham, and she conceived right away. There was no question then that Avraham did not have a problem producing children. It was Sarah who suffered from infertility. It made no sense to argue that Sarah suddenly became pregnant because of the night she spent in Abimelech's palace, because the problem was with her, not with Avraham. This claim of the cynics of that generation was thus wholly illogical. Why then did Hashem find it necessary to perform a miracle to dispel it? Why was it so important for God to make it clear that Yitzchak was Avraham's child? Rav Aryeh Gans explains that what begins as silly cynicism gradually evolves into presumed fact. People can say whatever nonsense they want, no matter how illogical, and if they push it hard enough, they can convince people to accept it. Cynicism and conspiracy theories are so dangerous precisely for this reason, because they can be believed no matter how unbelievable they are. Even the most outrageous claims can eventually be accepted as ironclad truth. Social media today is awash with cynicism that has earned a receptive audience who now accepts it as fact. The phenomena of "I'm just asking questions" while proposing preposterous ideas as serious allegations and viewpoints did not start in our day. Already in the times of Avraham Avinu, there were cynics who were busy peddling nonsense, planting seeds of evil that blossomed in the form of hate and hostility, fueled by outright lies that people did not bother to question or challenge. This phenomenon is so dangerous that Hashem performed a miracle, making Yitzchak appear just like Abraham in order to combat it. Today, without such miracles, we need to fight back and resist this frightening trend, and do what we can to ensure that the lies spread by the cynics and our enemies are roundly refuted and rejected. We can also learn from this verse that while there are children who are embarrassed of their parents, and there are parents who are embarrassed by their children, with regards to Avraham and Yitzchak, it wasn't like that at all. Yitzchak prided himself in that he was Yitzchak, the son of Avraham, and Avraham prided himself in that Avraham fathered Yitzchak. That's according to the Midrash. Now we talk about digging wells and uncovering hidden potential. V'yachperu avdei Yitzchak, and Yitzchak's servants dug in the valley and found a well of fresh spring water there. Yitzchak redug Avram's wells, which had been filled in by the Philistines. They would claim that they could have provided enemy armies with needed resources if they had invaded their land. That was their reasoning. Avram had originally dug the wells to symbolize the importance of seeking spiritual riches that lay buried beneath the surface in a person. Although digging wells certainly served to further the advance of civilization wherever they were dug, they more importantly exemplified Yitzchak's message to the world. As opposed to filling a pit with water brought from elsewhere, digging a well reveals an already existing source of water concealed beneath layers of earth. Thus, whereas Avram's message to the world was, "Let me revive you with the refreshing water of divine consciousness," Yitzchak's message was, "Now that you have been revived, look for your inner source of water. Dig away all the dirt encumbering your life, and you will reveal within yourself a wellspring of divine awareness. This awareness will quench your spiritual thirst throughout your whole life." There are some other profound life lessons from our patriarch Yitzchak. Even when the Philistines or any opposing force plug the wells we dig, when the forces of evil attempt to prevent or undo our spiritual achievements, we must persist, digging again, forging onward, never giving up, not being discouraged in the face of such unexpected setbacks. We must be relentless in our pursuit of positivity. Digging wells also symbolizes our striving to uncover the inherent goodness in others, and also our choosing to focus on the flowers amidst life's challenges, rather than getting bogged down by the weeds, and to remain steadfast and resolute in the face of any opposition we encounter by appropriately channeling gevura, firmness and strength, which was Yitzchak's signature midah or character trait, into our avodas Hashem, our service of God. Now, the natures of Yaakov and Eisav. Yitzchak and Rivkah had no children for the first 20 years of their marriage. When at last their heartfelt prayers were finally answered and Rivkah conceived, she suffered intense pregnancy pain. God informed her through a prophecy to Shem, Noah's son, that she was pregnant with twins who would be opposites, not only physically but morally as well, and that each one's success in pursuing his path in life would be at the expense of the others. And the children were agitating inside her, the verse says. Even in the womb, consciously or subconsciously, the two babies were struggling between themselves, fighting over the inheritance of the two worlds, the material world and the world to come. Explains the Midrash that even then each was displaying its own tendency, Yaakov for good and Eisav for evil. And God told her, "Two nations are in your womb, two powers will diverge from within you. The upper hand will pass from one power to the other." Metaphorically, Yaakov and Eisav represent the two souls and their opposing drives that exist within each of us. We each possess an inner Yaakov, in other words, our divine soul with its godly drives, and also an inner Eisav, in other words, our animating soul with its selfish drives. When our divine soul asserts itself, it weakens the materialistic tendencies of the animating soul. The divine soul overcomes the animating soul in the same way that light overcomes darkness. Light does not have to actively exert itself to dispel darkness. Darkness simply ceases to exist in the presence of light. Similarly, as soon as we let the holiness and goodness of our divine souls shine by studying the Torah and observing the commandments, the selfishness of the animating soul disappears. And, by extension, when Klal Yisrael, the nation of Israel, all pursue and observe Torah and mitzvahs and keep the Shabbos, the entire world is brought to its state of spiritual perfection. May that time arrive very soon. Now Yaakov claims the birthright. On the day that his grandfather Avraham died, Yaakov was contemplating his future, realizing that his crude brother Eisav was not fit to bring offerings to Hashem, which was at that time the responsibility of the firstborn. V'yavo Eisav min hasodeh, and Eisav came in from the field. Despite Avram having just died and his family's mourning, Eisav separated himself and went about his normal evil business the same day. The commentators elaborate that on that very day, Eisav committed 5 sins. He dishonored a betrothed maiden. He committed murder, that being of Nimrod, the son of Nimrod. He denied God, he denied the resurrection of the dead, and he spurned the birthright. V'yomer Eisav el Yaakov haliteni nomin ha'odom ha'odom hazeh, al kein kora es shemo Edom. And Eisav said to Yaakov, "Pour into me now some of that very red stuff, for I am exhausted." Therefore his name was called Edom. Haliteni, the Hebrew word used, is a term which, Rashi writes, is associated with feeding animals. Eisav ate like an animal, mindlessly, gluttonously, in a debased manner. A righteous person, by contrast, eats with dignity, in reasonable amounts, patiently, ensuring to receive the appropriate berachos, to recite the appropriate berachos before and after, and for the sake of maintaining his health and strength, in order that he can serve God in the best way with all his faculties and concentration. An Eisav, however, eats like an animal, purely for physical gratification and enjoyment, without concern for his dignity. And he ate and drank and scorned the birthright. The Torah is suggesting that, just because of the way he ate and drank, he scorned or spurned the birthright. He showed his disdain for the position of firstborn, which is one of some nobility. A person of nobility eats in a measured, refined, and appropriate manner, befitting his stature and prominence. It is through this area of life that the righteous distinguish themselves from those submerged in physicality. They called his name Edom, meaning red, because he was so engrossed in himself and his physical desires that he referred to the food, which was the morning meal of his family, just by its color. By his speech and actions, it was Eisav who effectively assigned this name to himself, not intentionally but through his behavior. His manner of speech is what led to his being called Edom. We might say that this teaches us about the brand that we create through our behavior. When people think of us, what goes through their mind? What is their association when they hear our name? Our brand is something we should all be very conscious of. We should think seriously about how we are known and what we are known for, and try to act and speak in a way that is consistent with this brand, by which we wish to be known. Esav's rationalization for selling the birthright to his brother Yaakov was, Anochi holech lamus, I am going to die, so what is the point of me having the birthright? By these words, Eisav denied the principle of life after death in the next world, thereby showing he was unfit for carrying out any divine service. The sages also explained that Eisav hereby rejected the role of bringing sacrifices, because a person had to be so careful and meticulous with the offerings that any error could lead to the death penalty, not necessarily by an earthly court, but certainly from Shemaim, from heaven. Yaakov also possibly had a legitimate claim to the birthright, not necessarily as being the firstborn, but at least as being the first to be conceived by his parents Yitzchak and Rivkah. Now, the berachos, the blessings, was Yitzchak fooled? So the simplistic view is that Eisav duped Yitzchak. That Yaakov duped Yitzchak. But Yitzchak, who went so far as to dig wells to find water beneath the dirt, was a person who did not accept surface appearances, but always bored down to the core. Would such a discerning soul not recognize his own son's true character? One suggestion, therefore, is that Yitzchak was well aware that Eisav had negative traits, but chose to focus on his essential goodness. If you really love a person, as a father naturally does, you won't stop at the unpleasant surface. You'll dig deeper until you find the divine spark within, for every person's soul is an actual part of God. Yitzchak saw the fiery passion in temperamental Eisav, and recognized that, if harnessed for holiness, it could be immensely powerful. He refused to give up on that hidden divine power. Thus, Yitzchak wanted to name Eisav his successor because he recognized Esav's potential to become a fearless, godly warrior, dedicated to combating evil. Although Yitzchak had seen Eisav give in to the very temptations he should have battled, Yitzchak nevertheless felt that if he would bless Eisav, Eisav would take up the cause of goodness and righteousness. With his renowned superior power, sophistication, and skill, Eisav would then be able to accomplish God's purpose on earth far better than Yaakov could. Accordingly, Yitzchak's desire to bless Eisav was not naive indulgence, but a deliberate attempt to redeem and uplift his wayward son. Yitzchak thought that by pouring so much positive energy into Eisav, he could arouse the good inside him and enable it to dominate his personality. The blessings of material abundance and power were meant to encourage Eisav to use his gifts in support of holiness. Yitzchak envisioned a partnership. Eisav would excel in the physical realm and support Yaakov, who would dwell in the tents of Torah. A synergistic two brothers, two roles approach. This plan, however, was contingent on Esav's willingness to be refined, and in the end he proved unready. Rivkah realized Yitzchak's error. It was true that Yaakov was not the cunning, wild warrior that Eisav was, but the keen perception that Yaakov had developed by devoting himself to the study of the Torah could well provide him with the cunning necessary to overcome evil when confronted with it. Moreover, Yaakov's devotion to the Torah gave him a much stronger drive to make the world into God's home than Eisav could ever have. Rivkah also prophetically understood that the blessings had to go to Yaakov, at least for the foreseeable future. Esav's transformation would be a long process, one that could not happen in Yitzchak's lifetime or in one generation. In fact, the spiritual rehabilitation of Esav's legacy would unfold over centuries, indeed throughout the exile of Edom, our current era, as the Jewish people gradually sublimated and continued to sublimate the material will. Ultimately, in the Messianic future, the mountain of Eisav will be judged and redeemed, and those hidden powers will be manifest in holiness. Yitzchak's love sowed the seeds for that future redemption of Esav's sparks. Now, how is it permissible for Rivkah and Yaakov to trick Yitzchak? In order to save a life or to achieve shalom, peace, deception is justified, says the Gemara. And to save the life and legacy of an entire nation, it is certainly justified. Yaakov, like all Jewish boys, loved his mother. But he and his mother loved God and were fully aware of the sacred responsibility on their shoulders to be the guardians of their faith and their people. This was not a game. It was not a charade. Yitzchak, in his blindness or for whatever reason, felt that Eisav should receive the blessings. Rivkah, with her woman's intuition and her previous prophecy, though, knew better. Both Yaakov and Rivkah were fully cognizant of their mission to perpetuate Judaism and our glorious nation. And thanks to their courage, commitment, and preparedness for sacrifice, Jewish continuity was safe and assured for eternity. However, deception always has consequences, and one such consequence of Yitzchak's berachos is that ever since, the worldly norm is for Eisav to hate Yaakov. It's even defined as such in the halacha, in our normal way which we should act, or which the world acts, I should say. Now, Meah Shearim, and the purpose of wealth, 100 gates. So Yitzchak's righteousness was made evident to everyone when the yield of his crop, even in a time of famine, was miraculously out of proportion to the amount he planted. The Pasuk says, "V'yizra Yitzchak ba'aretz hahi, Meah Shearim." Yitzchak sowed grain in that region that year. He reaped 100-fold, for God had blessed him. It is clear from a close reading of the Torah's narrative that the patriarchs were astute businessmen. Nonetheless, it is also clear that they engaged in material pursuits solely with the objective of fulfilling God's will. In this case, Yitzchak's true goal in sowing grain was to be able to give charity to the poor, which the Torah stipulates can only be performed with one's own produce. Like our patriarchs, when our involvement in the pursuit of a livelihood and wealth is similarly motivated, we are blessed with overwhelming success. Now, Avraham versus Yitzchak. What are the brands of Avraham and Yitzchak? Avraham is the archetype of chesed, commonly translated as kindness or love. Yitzchak, by contrast, is the archetype of gevura, commonly translated as restraint or discipline. The true source of these traits is as they exist in the supernal image of God himself, and from there they are represented in the human condition. So God's supernal trait of chesed is embodied in Avraham, whereas his supernal trait of gevura is embodied in Yitzchak. Now, obviously, kindness and love are very different from discipline and restraint. In fact, they're essentially opposites. To be kind and loving is to open your heart, to reach out and give freely. A loving person is typically extroverted, always seeking to bring more people into his or her embrace. Discipline and restraint couldn't be more different. It's when you're feeling personal and introverted, discriminate and discerning, hesitant to share with others and eager to percolate within yourself. True to his extrovert nature, Avram's love was unbridled and unrestrained. His love was so passionate and indiscriminate, it was contagious and highly attractive. It explains why he had a huge following wherever he dwelt. It's also why he was always moving around, sharing awareness of God. He was in love with the God he had discovered, and he needed others to experience the same joy. Yitzchak, however, was the polar opposite. He was just as passionate as his father, but from a place of discipline, restraint, and awe. That was his nature, and it manifested in his relationship with God and his relationship with others. Yitzchak's approach was more internal, cerebral, and deliberate. Of course, Yitzchak's path isn't nearly as popular as Avraham's, and Yitzchak didn't have a huge following. Unlike his father, he didn't really budge from his home, preferring to stay in one place and deal with a more selective audience who took things seriously. That's not to say that Yitzchak rejected his father's approach. He just interpreted it in different terms. He took that passion and love for God, the world, and humanity and filtered it into something he felt was real. That's why Avraham and Yitzchak both dug wells. They engaged in the activity of exposing water, which represents life, energy, and goodness beneath everything. Avram's approach was far broader, whereas Yitzchak's was more deliberate, but it was the same pursuit, to dig beneath the surface and find goodness. But if we ask which is more sustainable, whose approach lasts longer, the answer, surprisingly, is Yitzchak's. That's the trick with that elusive and marvelous thing we call love. It needs discipline, work, guidance, boundaries, respect, and a lot of selflessness. If it's freewheeling and happy-go-lucky with no boundaries, it very quickly becomes hedonistic, self-serving, and perverse. So many young, starry-eyed youth think that love is some magic potion you drink and miraculously works forever. But it doesn't work that way, as we know. Maybe for a month, a year, or two, but certainly not forever. Avram's wells were very exciting, but eventually they got stuffed up. Yitzchak's deliberate restraint and wisdom puts parameters and guidelines on that love and makes it last forever. And that's the end of Parsha Toldos. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back again next week, with God willing, with Parshas Vayetze. All the best. Shalom.